You're tuned in to the MtG Cable cast, where they cover Magic, the Gathering finance. All right? You don't know about it? You're tuned in right now and get ready to learn some shit. Buckle your seatbelts and light a blunt and get ready for the MtG Cable cast. Starring LotR and Thirsty, them onion head motherfuckers.
Alrighty, guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabal cast. And of course, the big news hits. The ring has been opened, it has been graded, and spawned a million memes of it only getting a 9, which, let's be real, we knew was going to happen because it came out of the pack curled before it was even in a pack. At any rate, that changes things. So, let's take a look at what probably the most unique set in Magic history in terms of what it's done for the financial market of the game, what that means philosophically. So we've got 4 different topics that we broke it down to that we thought were the most important, and that's what we'll be discussing today.
Yep. So first, the obvious one, well, now that the ring is hit, what kind of happens to the set into the future? And in my mind, the set stays hot till the modern PT, and it remains hot coming out of it for a while, and that is basically so competitive modern and legacy players can continue to search for the few cards they need. For Commander players, the hype's going to die down the moment that WotC moves into spoiler season. For Commander Masters, that ends up pre-releasing the weekend after the modern PT. I found out as I was doing this. For some reason, I thought the modern PT was in the fall. Long term, I do expect the boxes to hold value, but that might be years out, especially if we get all 4 or possibly more print waves on this. And I did a little bit of work on TCG Player. Collector booster boxes, the sales are holding steady in terms of price and quantity, removing the single day outlier after the ring was found. So they're steady right now. Set booster boxes, sales volume, again, is steady, but there's been a slight, an approximate 3% increase in price over the last few days, which I find interesting. Collector boosters, individuals, the sales look to be trending downward in terms of quantity, but up by a noticeable amount over 3 days. So it's like a weird. They took a weird plateau, like a weird hit after the rings, and then a retrace that I can't really figure out. Draft booster boxes sales numbers have absolutely tanked, but prices have noticeably increased, which I found interesting. And then this one specifically, bundle gift editions that contain the full art ring, sales numbers have started to tank because people were using that as a way to get their ring. They're on the cheap, as well as a chance at a collector booster, singular, and the price is slowly trending downward as well. So the collector booster boxes, that's going to be the premier item. So that kind of holding steady in price and quantity makes sense. The rest of it is, I want to say, par for the course, except for the weird downturn in collector boosters as individuals with a retrace.
Yeah, I think the thing to me is that, and this is something I'd meant to mention last week when I picked the ring, as kind of like a forecast, was when these gift bundles come out, I think they will quickly become one of the better selling ways for people to collect this set. Because everyone is going to want the one ring. So, hey, the one ring buy list for basically half of what the bundles cost. Then you have a collector booster and 6 set boosters to pick up. Well, I mean, set boosters are pretty good to open as long as you're not chasing commons. So I think what we've seen basically is par for the course. Now, the thing that's really interesting to this, and this is something I'll get on to with question number 2, is what this means long-term financially for everything else in the set. Because having all of this extra product opened by people who don't give a shit about circulating it because they don't play, so they're just going to dump it to whatever LGS. They don't know buy lists. They don't know any of that stuff. Well, that's pretty standard. So that's the thing that I'm very interested in seeing, because everyone basically expected this stuff to crater after the ring opened and then sort of normalize. And I think that's what we're seeing. It sucks that collector booster boxes are like $390, but guess what? They cost almost $300 from a distributor. So they're just going to be that price. And don't even get me started on Commander Legends 2. It's disgusting. But I think what now is we're going to standardize for a bit. And like you said, eventually hype will die down as the next collector or Commander Masters, Commander Legends, whatever they're calling it, comes out. Yep. Spoiler season starts. People care way less about it.
Yeah.
Because that's just how it goes. Mm-hmm. And which is really unfortunate, which we'll touch on later. But I think what we're seeing is what we're going to continue to see until the gift bundles come out. Then I'd expect a little bit more of a dip, actually. Because again, people are going to start buying those to get everything they want.
Yeah, exactly. Especially with the ring kind of taking over Modern as it is. People are going to be picking up those bundles for a while, which is going to add an artificial price tag, which could still be why we are seeing the price float so high on some of these other sets at the end of the day. The one thing I was trying to kind of extrapolate was where the price point on the ring, Delighted Halfling, and Bowmasters, and the 4-color Aragon, which has kind of just been trending up ridiculously recently, where they go, and if they are going to anchor the set in terms of EV as we move into the future. And I think that does kind of play into, the what now portion of this. And then the next question we have, which is a set with a bounty. Like, is something like this good for the game on the whole? I have my thoughts that I'll tie into that element of, like, when you only have a few cards that hit, but I'm curious to see, what do you think?
So looking at this from a sports perspective where bounties are common, every set has some hit with a massive bounty on it now. That's just standard. It's generally really bad for the financial value of everything else in the set. And the reason is people are just chasing the bounty because, I sold collector boosters to a sports store because people on his whatnot wanted to break it.
Yeah.
They'd never touched Magic before. So I think cards like this are bad for Magic. The reason being, first off, it gets more cards out there, which sounds really good, except there's more cards being put into the market by people who do not generate demand whatsoever. They are just chasing the big hit. They don't care about anything else. And as long as that's the case, that's bad for the overall financial health of the game, because all of a sudden there's all these extra cards out there that they can just Google buy lists for, and then they appear. And the problem is that more supply with no increase in demand drives prices down. Now, why is that bad? If any of you have tried to sell any card from a standard set in the last 2 years, you know why. It's just not good. It doesn't feel good to put your money in a game that doesn't pay it back in some way. Now, I think that this is good for the exposure for the game. I think that this is great for all of the Hasbro shareholders who don't give a shit about the viability of this game and only care about their dividends. But I'm not sure that this is good long-term for the health of the game because of how important the financial value of those cards is.
Got it.
Thank you for putting the One Ring very low insertion ratios outside of the gift bundles. Great. That's actually enabled the price to be held. But what happens next time, where the next set with a bounty like this goes 2 months without hitting the bounty? That's a ton more product that's open than what we have now, because this was, 3 weeks?
It had to have been between 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, between mailing to PSA from Canada, express service, whatever, doesn't matter. That's
exactly. Yep.
Yeah, it's the longer it takes, the more it negatively impacts the value of the set. Okay. What are your thoughts?
So for me, I had to split this up into 2 parts because I realized I was kind of seeing this through a negative lens, but when I broke it out, it helped me. At the end of the day, I think this is good for Magic, but everything needs to be handled better in the future in regards to the set itself. Finance, I'll talk about later when we get to the next bullet point. I also think that if this were Streets of New Capenna, an absolute dog water set that had a 1/1, that would have been a huge miss, and I'd be talking about this negatively. Because this is basically just used as a sales tactic to bolster what would have been an otherwise poorly selling set.
Yeah.
At a time of year where WotC has admitted that it is very difficult for them to move product and even hold events. So I think we talked about this in the last episode where they basically took the Q2 set, pulled it towards Q1, took the Q3 set, pulled it towards Q4, and opened up this new space in the summer where they can put an ancillary product or products to sell to kind of bolster their summer numbers, their late Q3 numbers. And they'd done it before with Conspiracy. I think that hit during the summer, at least the first one. I think Commander Masters hit around the same time, or whatever was the first Commander Legends. And maybe even the first Modern Horizons hit during the summer. So we have this kind of idea that a summer set is going to help bolster sales. And doing the bounty in the summer set was definitely good for Magic on the whole, because that helps float WotC as a sales tactic. If I just want to jump to the next bullet point of the long-term financial viability of bringing in other IPs, if Magic turns into Wibes Wars, skinning every set in an IP, we've definitely jumped the shark. If once a year WotC wants to drape a supplemental set in the cloak of an external IP and then do a commander set as well in another IP, and what I mean by that is we have the Lord of the Rings set, the Lord of the Rings Commanders deck, that's one, and then further this down the line we have the Doctor Who Commander sets. There's no constructed set, whatever, built around it, like that kind of thing. I think we'd be in a good spot. Bringing in external IPs does bring in new people to the game, though it might not convert those people into players at all, and I think we need to recognize that. So no matter what WotC and Hasbro want to purport this set did for new players, this is just a way to wring money from people that wouldn't normally engage with the game during a time of year that historically is very bad for sales. So to kind of tie this all together, financially in the short term, I think it's great and sustainable at the aforementioned pace once a year with then another commander set. But the long-term impact of each set will be minimal at best, and doing this multiple times a year is going to push people out of the game for sure. Now, to talk about an elephant in the room, I'm unsure how to feel that LOTR was effectively another Modern Horizon set and just absolutely fucked over Modern and Legacy. Immediately, this set, like both Horizon sets before it, has continued the illustrious tradition of highlighting the fact that WotC either doesn't or doesn't know how to balance these for Modern. We now have enough data points to point out a trend, and if this continues, they are going to push players that engage with Modern away from these sets and the format. And sure, this might be a goal, but it's really hard to parse out when we're 3 weeks away from this set's Pro Tour.
It's very strange to me. So I think long-term financial viability of IPs, there's two things it comes down to. First off, we don't know what sales numbers look like.
Nope.
Ultimately, is this financially viable? I think is something that is important to Hasbro and their shareholders. From what they said at the last earnings call, I don't think it is, because they didn't meet demand because of the cost of bringing in new IPs. But who knows? The thing that's really interesting to me is when I was thinking about the long-term financial viability of bringing in other IPs, what IPs can they bring in that are bigger than Lord of the Rings? Doctor Who, Disney.
Problem is Lorcana.
So that's not happening. Final Fantasy, who has their own card game that still exists. Not happening. Dragon Ball Z, own card game, already exists. What IPs can you bring in? You already did Warhammer, and Warhammer, they're like $400 for the collector sets that were $800 when they came out. Now on TCG. I just don't know what IPs they can pull out of their hat now that are going to generate sales numbers like this is my main concern. And because of that, I don't think it is viable, because you've got to have an absolute banger of an IP and an absolute banger of a set. And this is just, to me, pure happenstance that we happen to luck across this as Wizards of the Coast. And granted, I'm not saying this is a banger set, because like you said, this has just destroyed Modern and Legacy. It's awful. But that's the thing that makes me question the long-term viability of it. Because obviously, if you have a one-of-one, if you have a bounty card, that's great. That's going to sell stuff. But that doesn't affect the financial viability of the IP itself. I mean, are we going to get like Magic the Gathering Forrest Gump Magic the Gathering 20th Century Fox animated shows from the 90s. Like I just don't see that happening. I don't know what IPs they can bring in at this point that aren't Godzilla, which we already did. My Little Pony, which we already did. Well, yeah, kind of did.
We had the convention stuff.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about that too. And like you have some big ones like trying to bring in something like Wheel of Time, which is much narrower audience, or Game of Thrones, which has like the HBO audience you can do.
Yeah.
There are elements and IPs out there that you can definitely latch onto, but none of them are going to be as all-encompassing as something like this, or something like Stranger Things, but you couldn't build the entire set around that show because there just aren't enough individual characters to really build out, you know, a 200 or 300 card set. You're going to run into a lot of like Demigorgons A through like Z, right?
Yeah.
Spot fillers, basically. And
I think the only way you have that happen is if you do like, I don't know. I mean, even Wheel of Time, it's not as good.
No,
I don't think there is an IP. You're right.
Yeah, they could probably figure it out. You might have to mush a bunch together, and it might feel like Saturday morning cartoons. It just kind of runs one into another. But I'm sure there's something out there.
Nintendo?
Yeah, I've heard people mention that. You can try and reach out to them and see what you can get.
Just no Pokemon in that one. Sorry, guys.
Oh yeah, because the Pokemon Company owns that, but they also have their own game. So what are you going to do about that one? But yeah, like it's definitely the opportunity to do that. But each time you kind of shrink your audience. So starting here and working your way down, especially if this was a proof of concept, might not have been the best idea. So this could be the end of the day for this as well, which is, you know, kind of neat. We might just go back to the secret layer stuff, which I think is fine. Like just, well, you get to reskin your existing game pieces, right? It's a lot
to your
easier.
Fandom, yeah,
exactly.
That's fair.
Like
just an old fuddy-duddy.
Exactly. It doesn't take that long to reskin, you know, 8 to 10 elements of Magic the Gathering to make a Jaws secret layer, for instance. You already have is it just Great Shark? Like that's already a card.
Look, I just want to get something signed by the entire cast. A Magic card signed by the entire cast of Jaws. That would be sick. Right. I'm in.
So you have the element to go back to secret layers and kind of prove it out there. But yeah, long-term viability financially is definitely going to be kind of dependent on how often they want to do this crap. Definitely for sure.
Which seems like 1.5 times a year, I guess.
For right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
They cut back on the
last year we
layers.
had 1, this year we have 2.
Well, it depends if you count the secret layers, right?
That's fair, yeah.
So we've seen a reduction in that for the summer set, basically. Now, the last question that we had outstanding is, what does an LGS stuck on collector boosters or collector booster boxes do with the market spiraling downward, which we saw when we kind of came up with these questions, and now we've seen that retrace on the individuals. So for me, and I want to throw this out there before you just spout off, because you actually have domain knowledge.
That's fair.
For me, what I would do is I would slow drip the product and save a bunch for the holiday season. I'd probably look to keep about 10% of my product to push out in November, but I'd earmark that and then just slowly reload my displays until I hit that threshold, right? So I'd sell 90%, keep 10. Then during the Q4 rush, I'd sell them at a discount compared to whatever the market price is, because at that point, they'll be collector's items for people that enjoy the IP. They'll be great throw-ins to people who would, like we talk about, just kind of come in and say, what do you have for Magic? And it just helps my shelves look more unique, especially if I end up selling through my 90%, just a gap in time, and then 10% for the holidays. I don't think I'd ever fire sale these unless I just can't really move them between now and Q4, or the One Ring gets banned in Modern and I need to get to that 10% threshold for the holidays. Because if that's the only card that's really pushing the set and has that kind of price tag, then I need to get rid of everything I can up until Q4. Because that's it. That's the card in the set right now. So
yeah, I think the important thing for me is, as an LGS, did I overextend into this? Mm-hmm. How deep did I go? And that kind of changes what I'm going to do with it. Obviously, if I overextended, I'm not going to fire sale, but if right now on a box is like $390, I'm going to throw some up for $370.
Yep.
Just a couple, get them out, recoup some of the money, and probably sit on, for a smaller LGS, a case if I know I'm going to sell that out over the next year,
Okay.
a pack at a time or a box at a time. Now, for your bigger LGSs, like you said, you can just slow roll this stuff. It's an IP that has iconography behind it. It's the kind of thing that maybe down the line someone's just like, I remember this set. I'll just grab one for fun. And you don't mind selling. Because I don't see, unless the ring gets banned from everything, the halfling or hobbit gets banned from everything, barring mass exodus of this set from legality, a la Modern Horizons 1, I don't think the price goes below, $350 on it. So I think you're fine sitting on it. But again, that depends on the size of your store, how hand to mouth you are, whatever. Now, I will say, we purchased quite a few extra the week before the ring was popped. We're re-upping again because it doesn't matter. It's still moving at a number that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where things really get, tricky with it is what scale are you at? And that informs what you're going to do. Because I think, like you said, when he formulated this question, it was spiraling down.
Yeah.
It went from like 500 to 320 or something, and then it's just gradually retraced back up.
Yep.
And I do think the 350 to 400 is probably where this set sits forever.
Yeah.
And that's fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
No, not at all. I'm curious. So my LGS does something where for supplementals, it seems like they have a price threshold, either per pack or per box. And if it crosses that threshold, then they won't open it for singles. And apparently LOTR was kind of straddling that line all the way up until they received allocation. And then they decided to step back from it. So there are no singles in the case right now because nobody sold anything back as far as I can tell. And if the set and draft booster boxes do dip in price, if it crosses below a threshold or they're just sitting in stock for long enough, I wonder if my LGS will just decide to kind of get it gone. I don't know how much is left, but
no, that's fair. That is an option. And I think that one of the worst things about this set is that it was such a, and we kind of touched on this last episode, it was a bad test case, I think, for the LGS.
Yeah.
Because I can't not carry this product, especially when there's $1 million or more bounty on a card. I definitely can't not carry it. Mm-hmm. But the cost associated with it is absurd comparatively.
Yeah.
And that makes it very difficult to deal with as an LGS.
Yeah. I'll be curious to see what happens because we thought this would be a set that would hit all 4 print waves.
Mm-hmm.
And, Modern Horizons stuck around forever at distro.
And there's another reprint coming.
Yeah. So I wonder what's going to happen with this set if WotC is happy with sales, and it looks like it's going to continue to sell. People continue to chase the ring because the next ban and restricted announcement, I believe, is in Q4. Unless they need to emergency ban something. I think that's the cadence. I'd have to go back and look. So there's the opportunity that the One Ring continues to push sales of this set. Like Bowmasters is probably the next most expensive card when you're not looking at variants. And then Aragorn Delighted Halfling. No, that's an Aragorn variant. And then Delighted Halfling. I can't remember.
Maybe. Delighted Halfling, that's the one. But again, what we saw with Modern Horizons 1 was the cards were tearing the format apart. But they didn't want to ban them because the set was moving. So that's my worry for Q4. Is it going to matter? Who knows? Maybe, maybe not.
Yep. So we'll see.
Yeah.
All right. Ready for picks?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, cool. So for me this week, I'm going with a card that I definitely am certain that we talked about a lot in the podcast Discord, and I thought I bought, but I cannot find. So I'm kind of in a weird spot with this right now. But it is Silk Guard from Commander Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. And this is an instant, X and a green. Put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to X target creatures you control, period. Auras, equipment, and modified creatures you control gain hexproof until end of turn. So it's basically yet another in the lineage of heroic intervention.
Yeah.
So day of, I only added this to my notes about 2 months ago. Card King was buying 33 at $4.35, and TCG had only 38 copies LP or better at $3.41. And the note I had for this was, what happened? And I still can't figure out what that was. So I just cycled back to it. And what I found when I was taking my notes, like literally yesterday, was CK's buying 25 at $1, which is less in quantity, more in price. And there are 88 listings on TCG Player for $270. So CK quantity goes down, price goes up. TCG listings go up, price goes down. This has kind of been this running trend that I've had with a lot of my picks. But as of today, CK is now buying 30 copies of this card, so they're buying more at $1.35. So that's a 30% increase, in a day or two, which is awesome. And
Very good.
When we look at this card, it is basically in Commander, it's Heroic Intervention for Voltron style decks that play green with an upside. And when we dive in through the format, we see that Silk Guard is it's a pretty interesting spell because of how narrow it is compared to other alternatives like Heroic Intervention, Teferi's Protection, and Unbreakable Formation. But the uniqueness of Silk Guard is really why I wanted to come back and look at this. It doesn't save the entire squad like the cards I mentioned, but it only saves those that are modified and a subset of permanents to keep those creatures modified.
Yep.
And it can also further your game plan in a pinch, as the counter placement allows you to go extremely wide. If you have a growing rate of Itlamok flipped, or another way to generate a lot of mana as you head into combat or before damage, you can just plus up the squad and call it good and basically take somebody out that way. What we're seeing from the data submitted on Rec, though, is a little more interesting with this card, and I'll start up at the top and show you guys. So we're basically seeing it's a lot of utilization within decks that are reliant on counters of various types, where +1/+1 counters do make up the overwhelming majority of the counters theme. And then you have commanders like Experimental Kraj, and one I've never read before, Migwaz, Maze Crusher, way far down the line. Now, we're not seeing on the initial page commanders like Skullbriar. They work with counters that aren't just +1/+1 counters, but if you look at those commanders themselves, you will see Silk Guard in the lists. So I have this written as an issue, but it's not. This is just where the utilization of Silk Guard in those decks is below the waterline for visibility on the Silk Guard page itself. So there's a ton going on with this card that isn't just displayed on the Rex results page. So you just got to dig in a little bit. And another call out that mirrors the above is that equipment and aura-based Voltron decks, helmed by cards like Toski and Thrun the Lastral, that's the original Thrun, are also using Silk Guard, but are, again, below that aforementioned waterline. So when you just take a look at this card and you just see a ton of commanders that involve counters to do various things, +1/+1 mainly, it does seem like people are not utilizing this card elsewhere, but they are when you start to dig in. And this is part of the reason I like this card. As people look into individual commanders, they are seeing this card where they would expect, despite the low adoption rate according to its page. Not every deck with green in it will use Silk Guard, unlike Heroic Intervention, but if you're going to modify your creature, this is definitely a card you'll want. So this is what I mean by all of this, is that if you want to build a Toski deck, you're going to find Silk Guard in the list. If you want to build a Silk Guard deck, you're going to find a completely different theme, but that's also just some weird way to think about this, as building a Silk Guard deck versus a Toski deck. Now, timeline. In the last 4 months, this sold about 1,200 near mint copies, so that's 300 a month, approximately 9 per day. And the anchor of the gaming company's 238 at $2.37 moves in a little bit over a month, and from there the price with shipping moves up to $3.50 fairly quickly, and then it's a slow, steady climb upward that might not turn any heads. So buying in now will allow us to churn this based on prices in about 2 months, and then we'd get in early enough and possibly be able to re-up before this hits stocks, which is also really nice. When something like this doesn't turn heads, it means we have the ability to just re-up like we want and kind of make waves ourselves. We don't have to go in and buy all the quantity. We can just kind of move really slowly and be able to dip our toes in multiple times. Insofar as where to send this for profit, I'd hold these back for a bit and then look to trade them out before moving to buy list. So while Card Kingdom has seen a decent increase in buy list price and ABU Games has a decent trade value, I don't think that's the play for the immediate turnaround. It's basically to the player. So either locally from your binder, or you can go back into the open market. But buy list is not where I would be immediately. Reprint equity is weird because there's a chance this gets upcycled into a standard set that cares about modified creatures, as it's not an oppressive effect. We've seen Heroic Intervention more than once. Similarly, a commander reprint would require a green-based modified deck that would most likely be attached to a standard set that cares about it. So that's really it. It is kind of the idea of modified. It hasn't really fallen out of favor, but it hasn't been quite there. So that's where I would expect it to catch a reprint, because it's not as agnostic, as open-ended as Heroic Intervention, Teferi's Protection, and Unbreakable Formation. So this does kind of insulate us a little bit. By quantity, like I mentioned up top, I'm fairly certain I bought a bunch, but I don't know where from. They're not in my TCG player orders. I scoured CK, so the last thing I can think about is ABU. So once I find them, I'll toss a quantity up in the Discord. But if I can't find them, I'd still be happy throwing between $30 and $50 at this card to move in trade.
Yeah, I think the thing that really makes this a good one to me is obviously Heroic Intervention is, great against Wraths. The fact that this is good against decks that just go big mana, or in decks, and that this is good in Voltron decks as well. Way back when the format first started, it was Rafik or bust. Yeah. That was just your Voltron general. This slides into that. Most of the better Voltron generals that have come out since also slide in with green. Yeah. And obviously Toski is a very good general that a lot of people like. Great there. I think the thing to me that Heroic Intervention is kind of indicative of maybe is that, Heroic Intervention obviously withstood multiple reprints, multiple reprints, and still held a price. Now, I don't know if this will hold the same, only because it may not have the widespread viability in terms of eye appeal. Just looking at it doesn't seem like it's the same. It clearly is to me. I mean, obviously it doesn't protect from a Wrath, but it has just as much viability in just as many decks. And that's the thing that's really interesting to me about it, is it's going to be, if it gets reprinted, which I don't think it will. With you, I think we have to go heavy modified, which WotC doesn't give a shit about. We make it evergreen. All right, how many mechanics have they made evergreen and then never seen or heard from again? I'm not too worried about it. But yeah, I think this is great. It's a casual card. Yeah. It's a competitive card too, because it offers protection. If you are a Thrasios deck, you can run this. It's an extra piece of protection. There's a lot of things that make this a really good card. My main concern would be financial viability after a large reprint. But I don't think we see that reprint anytime soon, or probably ever.
Yeah, I almost want to say that this spike is probably from a content creator that I just didn't see, because this was, again, in the Capenna Commander decks only, and I don't think they were good decks. So I don't know how many people actually bought into them, and if they did, which deck this was in. I haven't done that little bit of due diligence, because honestly, this card tanked so hard, I don't think anybody cares. No. That's also one of the reasons why I would like to move this in my binder first, because I don't know if a lot of people have actually seen this card at all, because of just where it came from, and it being as prevalent as it is on TCG Player. There are a ton of vendors with like quantity 20 plus.
Right.
Like, there's something here.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. My pick, a little bit different, kind of keeping with what I've been doing lately with my picks. So, I'm choosing Foil Deglamer. There's a couple reasons why. So, There are some of the other finance discords that we're in that basically have started hitting like the gate cards or pauper cards. And then Mr. Alt, great guy, posted in the MTG Finance subreddit, how do you pick spike or buyout adjacent cards to target? So I am picking Foil Deglamer for that reason. I think this is a good spike or buyout adjacent card because this is a low pop pauper foil, whereas Seagate I think is a bad look because it's a really fucking high population card that's legal in pauper. You're going to have to move so much of that to make even a slight dent in the price. Not to mention, it doesn't have the commander playability that Deglamer does. So Deglamer's easy. Instant, green 1, target artifact or enchantment, shuffle it into its owner's library. Simple. Mm-hmm. Dodges any kind of reanimation, dodges exile. It saves your own stuff against removal if you want it to. But this card's never been reprinted. In fact, it has had a better version of the card printed at a higher rarity. So I don't see this card getting reprinted anytime soon. It's a low population foil from a set and plane that we're probably never revisiting, which makes me very sad because the art design on Lorwyn was amazing. Now, the really interesting thing about this is liquidity. So when I bought my copies for Pauper, it was the 16th of last month. If you look at the sales history, you'll see 4 LP and near mint copies go. Since then, only 7 more copies have sold. Or sorry, 6. Now, the interesting thing is that after I bought my 4 copies, there were still, it was between 26 to 28 copies listed. So some have fallen off the market while others have sold. Now, what makes that really interesting is obviously it could just be a customer service thing. Maybe somebody ordered it, the order was canceled, whatever. But if you take a look at Star City and Card Kingdom, they have one of each, or one foil each. And it is on both of their buy lists. Card Kingdom is currently buying a maximum of 5. Star City is buying whatever you'll send them, but they're paying a fraction of what it's actually worth. Right now, we're sitting at 18 total foil copies on TCG. There's about 20-something foil copies on eBay, and I didn't check MKM, but I'm sure there is a wealth of them over there that present a good arbitrage opportunity. So, to me, explaining the buyout adjacent thing, if we're targeting a pauper staple, what's a low print pauper staple that has upside like EDH?
Yep.
Deglamer. In terms of quantity, honestly, it's mostly a sideboard card in pauper. You'll only see 1 or 2 main. So I would really only go 2 to 3 deep because this is something that is an incredibly slow mover. It's not something you want clogging up your binder. You don't want it clogging up your case. You want 1 to 2 copies max. They're going to be a slow roll. The nice thing is that the price point is appealing for a slow roll at sub $15. If this was a $500 card, I'd want to slow roll that way less. But we have some viability here because it's such a low cost.
Yep.
I'm on 4 myself. I've got 2 for playing, and the other 2 I'll just sit on and sell eventually to pay for the other 2 because they're not cracking more of these, and they're not printing more either.
Yep.
That's it.
Yeah. Like I read this, and I was like, this reads like Unravel the Aether, and then it is Unravel the Aether, just at common, not uncommon, which is the important part for pauper. So, yeah, 100%. If you're looking to move in for pauper, this is where you want to be. Like, if you believe in that as a spec. Unravel the Aether does have a pedigree as far as constructed play is concerned.
Yep.
So we know that the effect is powerful, that you don't need the destroy. Sometimes you can't. The artifact is indestructible. So you just want to get rid of it the best way you can, and that is to tuck it. And for 2 mana, this is the cheapest option you can get. And so when you look at these cards and you look at the price trajectory of Unravel versus Deglamer, like, well, why does Deglamer actually hold any kind of market value? It is basically population. The population of Deglamer versus Unravel the Aether is, like, got to be close to a magnitude at this point, based on what we know for New World Order that happened around RTR. So Deglamer picks up a real price point as Pauper starts to pick up, especially on Moto, and now people are more interested in playing it in paper. That's why the market for this card is $1.50 compared to Unravel, which is like 25 cents.
Yeah, basically nothing.
Yeah. So all in all, I like it as a spec. It's a card I don't think I've actually ever owned because Unravel was printed shortly after I started playing Modern. So it's not one I would need. If I played Pauper, I would probably understand the additional utility of this, but I don't really engage with that format. So I'm almost surprised that this doesn't cost more than it does currently, based on what I know about Pauper, although you can't de-glamour a pawn of Ulamog.
No.
Right? That's the Tron finisher?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or eggs.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So we still have a ways to go. But at any point in time, that format changes so much that we could be hitting Oublier with de-glamour again, and I would never know.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, so all in all, I like the pick, especially if you have a Pauper metagame to kind of move stuff to. I think then paying attention to that format is very important. So I like call-outs like this. And understanding that kind of adjacent pick is really good. I think we've done it before. We've made...
definitely.
My last two picks, they were adjacent to one another based on the themes, right? World Shaper and Ren 7.
Yeah.
But not based on a spike of anything else. But we have done that before. Like if people are targeting X and they expect X to be the next big thing, well then you can move on Y because that has to go with it. The only way X is as good as it is if Y comes along for the ride.
Yeah.
So then there you go. So again, it's another good market call out and another good, exercise for people. So, thanks to Jason Alt for the question on the finance sub. And it led to what I think is going to be a decent pick, even in non-foil. Yeah. So, weehaw. Anything else before?
Anything else?
No.
Nope. I got nothing.
Right, so
I do have one thing.
Oh, no.
I wanted to apologize for not calling out that the gift bundles did contain the One Ring when I was saying reasons to pick this up after the fall. That is when I would actually pick it up as my pick last week. Mea culpa.
Okay, there. Yeah. I had a hard time figuring out which bundle was which. I just knew one had 2 words and one had 3, and I never saw a good enough photo. And they went from like reasonable if you could find them at big box to like $200. So I just stopped caring immediately. Like, cool.
Too many products.
Yep, pretty much. So for at MtG Cabalcast on Twitter, Facebook, Patreon, and YouTube, I am at Halt. I am Reptar. You are
at Thirsty Sizzler.
And we'll see you next week.